Hello everyone, my name is Ben and welcome back to PASSTHEauxCORD, a channel where I am very glad that you are here, so thank you for being here. And today we're going to be taking a look at another entry of the Rolling Stone Top 500 albums of all time. This time we're going to be taking a look at a compilation called The Indestructible Beat of Soweto. This is a 1985 compilation of South African pop music from the city of Soweto and, of course, artists who are from there. I talked about how I was in a little bit over my head with the Chaka Khan and Rufus album that we looked at, since 70s R&B wasn't exactly a genre that I was entirely familiar with. Now we take 80s South African pop and I am not in over my head anymore. I am drowning far below the surface. You'll probably never see me again, okay? You know, it's a lost cause. But the fact that this is so far out of my comfort range is something that I'm actually enjoying quite a bit, just because I never would have listened to this kind of music before, almost certainly. If it wasn't for doing this list, most of the albums on here I may have never heard, even though I had absolutely no idea what to expect from this culture, from this era, from this country, anything. It actually isn't really too far off from what my westernized 2020 uncultured ears would be expecting. Of course, there's going to be some vocal deliveries and styles that I'm a little bit unfamiliar with, a little bit shaky on in that way, but that also has a lot to do with the fact that this is an entirely different language that sounds nothing like English, and whether that's because it was commercialized for Western audiences by the record label, or it's because music has since incorporated many of these styles since the 80s and has become more popular in the general music landscape, I guess. I'm not sure, but it does still somewhat seem familiar to me. In fact, I'm almost strangely nostalgic for this sunny and bright mix of strings and drums. Comparing it to what was big at the time, I don't think it would really even be seen as that obscure or very different at all, comparing it to some of the big pop songs of the time. There's not that much in the way of danceability or synthesizers going into this. This is mostly just purely more raw acoustic recordings, but at the same time I feel like it just seems pretty normal, even given that. And again, this accessibility very well may be a double-edged sword, because while it does make it easier to process for ears like mine, and more than likely yours, it is making me question how genuine it is. But I mean, that doesn't necessarily affect the music itself. Even if that is the case, this is definitely not without merit, because I think that this is what a lot of people turn to explore some music outside of their country, outside of the general area of music that they knew, and it did definitely broaden some other horizons other than my own. This was something labeled under the term world music, which at the time was kind of a better than nothing type situation, because now that term is kind of looked down upon given the controversy we've seen with the Grammys. But at the time, how else were you going to hear music from places like Soweto? But even though that's taken up at least half of the review now, authenticity aside, I am definitely a fan of the music on here. There's just so many lively tunes that really do live up to the description of an indestructible beat. What's found on here, musically speaking, is usually pretty simple. Some very rudimentary strings and drums put together in a way where they are still very rhythmic, all layered with some vocals that, again, seem pretty unique to someone like myself who is completely unfamiliar. The very soulful, charismatic deliveries of the vocals on here definitely strikes a certain sense of enjoyability that I feel when listening to a lot of R&B and soul music. I think the instrumentals on here as well, though, really do strike up a lot of charisma and personality. The way that most of it is very stripped back, including even an a cappella cut, it just feels a lot more personal and down to earth. Unfortunately, I'm not really able to comment on the lyrics at all, as it isn't in my native language whatsoever, and I am unfamiliar with any part of this language. I couldn't find any place where it was manually translated and it would be very clear what all is being said, and I didn't really want to have to rely on something like Google Translate. Messes up enough with something like Spanish or French to the point where I just wouldn't trust it at all. But even despite the fact that I know absolutely no words that are being said on here, I feel like I can kind of relate to the emotion that's being felt on here. You know, it is just very emotive and really makes you feel a happy, upbeat vibe that I feel like they were trying to make you feel almost. So with all that being said, let's move on to the favorites. Polo Telani is definitely one of my favorites, and the more musically layered mix that it comes along with. I love the kind of duet style that this one has going on, a style in which would come up a lot of times later on the record as well. There's some nice percussion on here as well, and it just seems like such a solid upbeat track. A second favorite track for me is one that's definitely a lot harder to pronounce, but we're gonna go with Indoda Yejaze Elimnyami. And this instantly just has a set of strings that absolutely slaps, and I really love these shouty, non-lyrical vocals that go on here, this kind of chant that it has going on. The vocal effects definitely came from their time, as they're pretty goofy and almost may sound like someone talking into a fan. However, I do really like them because of the character that brings along with it. The vocal confidence on here is also really nice, and this is definitely one of the most lighthearted tunes on here. Again, just really love that about it. So Wabamba is a track that I really like, but one that I don't necessarily have a whole lot to say about. It was just a really pretty instrumental cut. It's relaxed and just kind of doesn't kill the vibe of the record whatsoever. Nancy Aimali, I think, is the closing cut on here, and it is the acapella one. It's also the longest song on the album, and for an acapella, you wouldn't expect it to keep you interested that long. But the way the vocals are layered on here, the very passionate performance that was given, it's just really good stuff all around. Least favorites were not very easy to come by, just because I feel like I enjoyed most of the songs on a pretty equal level. Emthogeni Wamkulu is how I think the only one of two least favorites is pronounced that I have. This one does have some very nice sounds to it. It just didn't stand out from the rest all that much to me, and really just wasn't one of the most memorable ones on the album. And I'm gonna go with Gikabanje Gakwada. I'm not sure if the ends are silent there, but I'm gonna assume so. Which, again, just seems a lot like much of the other stylings that had already taken place on the record, and it doesn't really make me walk away with a whole lot to say about it. That being said, even though those two are my least favorites, do keep in mind that I didn't mind them at all. So now, wrapping around here, I am going to have to actually say for the first time that this doesn't deserve its place on the list, and allow me to explain. I really think that it was kind of a cop-out for Rolling Stone to drop a few compilations everywhere. It almost just seems like it's somewhat pandery to just go, here's a collection of music from this era and this country, and now it's on here so that we've serviced that group of people. This is definitely an enjoyable set of tracks, and I think that it's a decent compilation. I also think that it does have its place in just the general recommendation list. You know, this should be an album that more people are checking out. However, I think that it would have been much more fitting to place an individual artist's work on here. You've got a list of, I believe, 10 different artists that appeared on this record. You could have gone into the discography of any of them, picked a record, and just tried to find the best one, or at least the most important one, the most well-accepted one. Because putting this probably overly commercialized set of tracks on this list from Soweto in the 1980s just doesn't feel as authentic to me as it would have to actually take an artist off of this compilation, out of that general area, culture, time, whatever, and put them on here instead. Part of me is just a little bit conflicted on that, due to the fact that I am glad that, you know, now we can recognize more artists at the same time, but it comes at a cost, because it means that not any of these artists are recognized as much as they probably should be. However, again, I will restate, I am a fan of the music on here. Personal enjoyment, I'm going to definitely give this the upper end of an 8 for sure. I will be coming back to this, and it is a really good experience that I would recommend to anybody. It isn't as out of the ordinary as you're probably expecting, given the fact that it is from a country whose music you're probably very unfamiliar with. So drop a like on the video if you did like what you saw today. Subscribe to the channel for more music related content coming your way. Hit the bell for notifications on that same thing as well. There's a new episode of the podcast uploaded every Friday. You can check out the channel where we upload those in the description below. Our last episode, we talked about some new albums, including the new record from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. So if that sounds interesting to you, go check that out. But that is just about going to wrap it up for this one, and I will see you in the next video.